Parents gave my brother a house and business loan, but left me empty-handed. All right, here we go. So, I'm Alex, 32, married to my wife, Grace, who's 31. We've been together for 6 years, working hard to build a decent life for ourselves. We've got a modest apartment, both of us holding down jobs, paying bills, and all that good stuff. Nothing flashy, but we're comfortable, and that's all I ever really wanted. Well, all I ever wanted, until I realized just how messed up my family dynamic was. Here's the thing. I'm the older child, and then there's my younger brother Liam, who's 29. Growing up, we had the usual sibling rivalry stuff. He was the annoying little brother. I was the one who had to play the responsible older kid role. But even then, I could tell something was different in the way our parents treated us. It wasn't in-your-face favoritism, but it was there, quietly, like an unspoken rule in the house. At first, I didn't mind. I figured, hey, every family's got their quirks, right? So I did what I was supposed to do. Went to school, got decent grades, graduated, went to college, and worked part-time jobs to pay my way through. I didn't expect my parents to cover my college expenses or anything. I mean, it would have been nice, but I wasn't holding my breath. My parents were never rolling in money, but we got by, and I'd always been independent. I've been used to handling things on my own, so working and studying was just normal to me. Now, Liam? He took a different path. College wasn't his thing, and he wasn't shy about saying so. I don't judge him for that. College isn't for everyone, right? But he kind of drifted through his early 20s without much of a plan. While I was stressing over assignments, balancing work, and trying to keep my head above water financially, Liam was, well, let's just say he was figuring things out. No part-time jobs, no real structure, just him and his dreams. Around 24, Liam decides he wants to open a restaurant. No experience, no real plan, just this idea that he'd be his own boss and make it big in the food industry. The surprising part? My parents, who've always been super careful with money, suddenly decided to back him. Not just a little either. They somehow managed to pull together $50,000 to help him launch this restaurant. Now, here's where it gets wild. Not only did they give him 50 grand for the restaurant, but they also handed him the down payment for a house that same year. I didn't even know they were capable of putting that kind of money together. It wasn't some mansion or anything, but it was a decent little place. Meanwhile, I'm still paying off student loans, working my ass off, and renting a small apartment. I didn't even find out about this right away. They didn't make a big announcement like, oh hey Alex, by the way, we're giving your brother a boatload of cash. Nope. I found out when Liam casually mentioned it during a family dinner. He was talking about the renovations he was planning for his new place, how excited he was to be his own boss, and how great it was that mom and dad believed in him. I just sat there, trying to process it all. After dinner, I pulled my parents aside and asked about it. I'll never forget the way they looked at each other, like they'd been caught doing something they knew they shouldn't have done but weren't sorry for. My mom shrugged and said, well, Liam needs a little extra help. You've always been the independent one, Alex. We knew you'd be fine on your own. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They just handed over tens of thousands of dollars to Liam, no questions asked. But when I was scraping by in college, working 2 jobs, they didn't offer a single dime. It wasn't just about the money, though that stung too. It was the realization that, in their eyes, I didn't need help because I was fine. Apparently, my success or struggle didn't even register as something worth supporting. So, I asked them flat out, did it ever cross your minds to offer me any help when I was in school, working nonstop just to make it by? My dad gave this dismissive look and said, you've always been driven, Alex. You didn't need our help. Liam just doesn't have that same drive. And that was it. End of conversation. I was floored. I felt like they just shrugged off years of my hard work, of me trying to be the responsible one they always expected me to be. Suddenly, it all felt so pointless. They were always going to see Liam as the one who needed help, the one who needed a little boost, while I'd always be the one expected to make it on my own. After that, I started pulling back. I didn't visit as much, stopped calling them as often. Every time I did see them, it was like this reminder that I was somehow less in their eyes. Not less successful, just less deserving of their attention and support. They didn't seem to notice my absence at first. They'd still call to update me on Liam's restaurant, ask if I'd seen his new place, talk about how proud they were of him. It was always about Liam. When Grace and I got engaged, we kept it small. We posted some photos on social media, and that's how my parents found out. I know that might seem harsh, but honestly, they hadn't been much of a part of my life for years. Why would I suddenly bring them into this major moment? They texted me after they saw the photos, saying they were disappointed that I hadn't told them personally, that they felt excluded, but they didn't even bother to congratulate me. The irony hit hard. They were upset I hadn't told them about my wedding, yet I was expected to be happy for Liam getting a business and a house on their dime. I finally decided it was time to speak up. I sent them a text, laying it all out, how their treatment over the years had made me feel like an afterthought. I told them it wasn't about the money, it was about how they'd chosen to support him in every way possible while leaving me to fend for myself. I don't know what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't the response I got. My mom called me ungrateful, saying I was holding a grudge over nothing, while my dad told me to grow up and stop making everything about me. Apparently, to them, my whole life has just been some minor detail, not worth their support or interest. So here I am, questioning everything. Is it so unreasonable to want a little acknowledgement, a little support for once? I've tried to make peace with it, but it's hard to just let it go when every conversation with them just reminds me of how little I apparently matter. All right, so after I'd finally told my parents how I felt about the whole favoring Liam situation, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd get it. I figured they'd at least take a step back, maybe try to see things from my point of view. I wasn't looking for an apology or anything dramatic, just a little bit of acknowledgement, but that's not what happened. A few days later, my mom called me. I thought maybe it was her way of reaching out to make things right, so I picked up. But right from the start, I could tell that wasn't why she was calling. The conversation kicked off with her saying, "I'm disappointed in you, Alex." That was her opener. No, "How are you?" No, "Let's talk." Just straight up disappointment. She didn't waste any time letting me know that she thought I was being selfish and childish for even bringing up my issues with how they'd treated me compared to Liam. She was saying things like, "Family is supposed to be supportive of each other, Alex. You're acting like you're above that." I tried to stay calm, really tried, but hearing her throw those words around was infuriating. I told her again that it wasn't just about the money they gave Liam. It was about how they'd been willing to support him in every way imaginable, while I'd been left to figure everything out on my own. It was like they never even saw me struggling through college, balancing work and all of that. Meanwhile, they'd handed Liam a business and a house without him lifting a finger, but she wasn't hearing it. She kept saying that I was holding a grudge over something that wasn't that big of a deal. According to her, I should just be happy that Liam was doing well and that our family was successful because of him. She even said, "You've always been so driven, Alex. You didn't need our help, but Liam, he needed that support to get going." That's when I lost it a little. I asked her straight up, "Why did you never think I needed help too? Why is it so hard for you to just admit that you've always favored Liam even when I was struggling?" I could hear her getting frustrated, like she was tired of explaining the same thing over and over. And that's when she hit me with the line that really got under my skin. "You're just jealous of your brother," she said. "I don't know why you're so bitter about his success. You should be proud of him." Jealous? I was stunned. I'd opened up about how left out and unsupported I felt, and her takeaway was that I was jealous of my little brother. I told her, "Mom, this isn't about jealousy. It's about feeling like I'm nothing more than an afterthought to you guys. I'm not angry that Liam is successful. I'm angry that you think he's worth supporting and I'm not." She didn't like that. Her tone got sharper, and she said something along the lines of, "Well, we did the best we could for both of you, and if you're too blind to see that, then I don't know what else to say." That's when I realized there was no point in trying to get through to her. My parents had already made up their minds about who I was in their story. I was the independent one, the capable one, the one who didn't need anything from them. And they were sticking to that version of events, no matter what I said. So I ended the call. But it didn't stop there. Later that night, my dad decided to chime in with his own 2 cents via text. He sent me this long message about how I was overreacting and that it was ridiculous to let something as small as a financial favor to Liam ruin the family bond. He went on about how family is more important than petty grievances and how I needed to mature and let it go. He even said that I was self-centered for making them feel bad about helping their son succeed. That text really got to me. All those years of working hard, of sacrificing and hustling to make a life for myself, and they had the nerve to call me self-centered? They were mad because I dared to ask for a little recognition of the unfair treatment. Grace found me reading the text, and when I explained what happened, she just shook her head. She told me that I had every right to feel hurt, and that my parents were completely out of line. She reminded me that I'd put up with this kind of favoritism for way too long, and that if I kept letting it slide, they'd just continue treating me this way. Honestly, Grace has always been the voice of reason in my life. She pointed out that my parents probably weren't going to change overnight, if ever. They were so locked into this idea that I was the one who didn't need help, that they couldn't see how hurtful their actions had been, and they definitely didn't like being called out on it. After sleeping on it, I decided to put some boundaries in place. I wasn't going to keep letting them guilt trip me every time I spoke up for myself. I sent a text back to my dad, short and to the point. I basically said, I'm not overreacting and I'm not going to apologize for sharing how I feel. I'm hurt, and if you can't understand that, then maybe we need to take a step back for a while. The silence that followed was pretty telling. No calls, no texts, nothing. They didn't reach out after that, not even to check in or make peace. For once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved, like I'd finally taken a stand for myself instead of just keeping quiet and letting them walk all over me. It's strange, though. Even after all of that, there was a small part of me that hoped they'd come around. I wanted them to at least try to understand. But as days turned into weeks with no word from them, I started to realize that they were probably never going to see things from my side. I mean, if they hadn't gotten it by now, they probably never would. That's where things are right now. Grace has been incredible through all of this, reminding me that family doesn't get a free pass to treat you however they want just because you share the same blood. I've started to accept that my parents and I may never see eye to eye, and honestly, I'm coming to terms with it. It's just tough because, as much as I want to let go, there's still that nagging feeling of betrayal that's hard to shake off. For now, I'm taking a break from them. I need time to figure things out and to decide if I even want a relationship with people who can't see the hurt they've caused. So after weeks of silence from my parents, just when I thought things were finally settling, my phone buzzes one afternoon. It's Liam. He hasn't reached out to me in ages, so seeing his name pop up was like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to expect, but after a minute of staring at my phone, I decided to pick up. Right away, he dives into it. No small talk, no, how's it going? Just, hey, I wanted to talk to you about all this stuff with mom and dad. I knew where this was headed, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to hear him out. Maybe, just maybe, he'd have some perspective that could help me understand. But no. Within minutes, it was clear he was just as clueless as my parents. Liam starts going on about how he doesn't understand why I'm making a big deal out of everything. He kept saying, Mom and Dad are just doing what they think is best, and how he felt like I was blowing things way out of proportion. It was honestly mind-boggling to sit there and listen to him, realizing he had no concept of what I'd been going through. I asked him, Liam, do you even get why I'm upset? It's not just about the money or the house. It's about how they've always prioritized you, how they were willing to hand you everything while I had to scrape by on my own. Does that not seem unfair to you? But he just shrugged it off like I was talking about the weather. Well, you always seemed fine, he said, like that explained everything. You've always been the one who has it together. I don't know what you want from them or me. The conversation was going nowhere fast, but I kept pushing. I told him how hurt I was, how for years I'd felt like the backup kid they only paid attention to when it was convenient. I was hoping something might click for him, that he'd at least acknowledge it was messed up. But instead he hit me with, look, they just helped me out a little because I needed it more. It's not like I asked for it. A little help? This guy got a business and a house and he calls that a little help? I almost laughed. It was like talking to someone who had lived a completely different life than me, like he'd grown up with different parents or something. But I guess, in a way, he did. Liam had parents who coddled him, who supported him financially and emotionally whenever he needed it. I had parents who expected me to figure it all out by myself. When I tried to explain this, he got defensive, saying things like, but you turned out fine, didn't you? And they probably thought you didn't need their help. At that point, it became clear that he wasn't going to get it. He honestly believed that because I'd managed to scrape by, it somehow justified everything. It was like he couldn't wrap his head around the idea that just because I turned out fine didn't mean the road to get here wasn't hell. Then he dropped this gem. I didn't ask them to give me money or buy me a house. They offered, so what was I supposed to do? Say no? He said it like I was somehow the unreasonable one for being upset about something he couldn't control. It was honestly exhausting. I told him, Liam, it's not about you asking for it. It's about the fact that they offered it to you without even considering that I might need a little help too. That's what hurts. But he just brushed it off, saying, well, you're the older brother, Alex. You're supposed to have it together. That was the last straw. I couldn't believe he actually thought that way. I mean, maybe my parents had trained him to see things that way, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. At that point, I knew continuing the conversation was pointless. He wasn't going to see things from my perspective, and he was just going to keep defending our parents and his right to accept their help. I told him, you know what, Liam? I don't expect you to understand. You got lucky. You were their priority, and you're right. You don't have to apologize for that. But don't expect me to sit around and pretend like it's fair either. I'm done trying to explain myself to people who don't want to understand. There was a pause, and then he said, I just don't get why you're so bitter about it. He sounded genuinely confused, like he couldn't comprehend why any of this would bother me. I didn't have the energy to keep explaining, so I just ended the call. There was no point dragging it out any longer. After hanging up, I sat there, feeling a weird mix of relief and frustration. It was clear to me that Liam was never going to get it. To him, the world was exactly as it should be. He'd been handed opportunities and support without having to ask for it, and he couldn't see why anyone else would be upset about that. I think that conversation really sealed it for me. Up until that point, there was a small part of me that hoped maybe someone in my family would understand where I was coming from. But after talking to Liam, I realized that they were all wrapped up in this narrative they'd built about me. The strong, independent son who didn't need anything. They'd decided I was fine on my own, so that was that. Grace came home later and found me sitting on the couch, clearly still fuming. She didn't even have to ask. She just sat down beside me and listened while I vented. I told her every frustrating detail, from how Liam thought I was overreacting to how he genuinely believed I should just be happy that he'd been given so much support. She let me talk it out, and then she said something that really hit home. She told me, maybe it's time to let go of the idea that they'll ever understand, Alex. You've done everything you can to make your side clear, and if they're not willing to see it, that's on them, not you. She was right, of course. I'd been holding on to this hope that if I just explained it well enough, if I just laid it out in a way that made sense, my family would finally understand. But the truth was, they didn't want to understand. They were comfortable with their version of events, where I was the strong one and Liam was the one who needed them. Changing that story would mean admitting they'd made mistakes, and I knew now that they weren't willing to do that. That night, I decided I needed some real distance from all of them. Not just a break, but actual space to live my life without their constant judgments and guilt trips hanging over me. It was tough to accept, but I knew it was the only way I was going to find any peace. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was finally taking control of the situation. I was done chasing their approval or hoping they'd magically change. If they wanted to keep living in their little world where I was fine and Liam was the one who needed them, then fine. They could have that world. I just didn't need to be a part of it. So, after that last conversation with Liam, I was ready to step back from the whole family situation. I was exhausted from explaining myself to people who just weren't going to get it. And honestly, I thought I'd made that clear enough in my last text to my parents. But apparently they didn't get the hint. About a week later, I got this massive email from my dad. He starts off by saying that he's disappointed in how I'm handling things and goes on this long-winded rant about how family is everything and that I'm ruining our bond by holding a grudge. It was paragraph after paragraph of this guilt-trippy nonsense about how I'm being immature and how I need to grow up and move on. I couldn't believe it. He didn't even acknowledge anything I'd said in my last message. It was like he was talking at me, not to me. There was no attempt to understand my perspective or even a hint of regret for how things had gone down. It was just a long lecture about how I was overreacting and making life harder for everyone. I stared at that email for a while, debating if it was even worth replying. Part of me wanted to fire back with everything I'd been holding in, but I knew it'd just be more wasted energy. I'd already laid it out for them, told them exactly how hurt I felt, how their actions over the years had made me feel like I didn't matter. They'd ignored all of that and decided to spin it as me being ungrateful or jealous. So I just left it on read and didn't respond. Grace found me later that day, and she could tell something was up. I showed her the email, and she just shook her head, saying, "You don't owe them a response, you know." And she was right. I didn't. But there was this part of me that felt bad. Like somehow, by not answering, I was the one being difficult. It's weird how family guilt sticks with you, even when you know you're in the right. But I held firm. I didn't reply. I told myself that if they wanted a relationship with me, they'd have to acknowledge my feelings and actually try to understand where I was coming from. Until then, I wasn't going to keep bending over backward to make them feel better about their choices. It wasn't fair to me, and I was done compromising my mental health to keep the peace. Of course, my silence didn't go over well. A few days later, I get a call from my mom. I almost didn't pick up, but a small part of me hoped she might actually be reaching out to talk, not to lecture. Spoiler alert. I was wrong. She starts off calm, almost sweet, which threw me off because that's not her usual style when she's upset. But then, after a minute or two, she drops the act and launches into this whole speech about how I'm tearing the family apart and how my stubbornness is causing everyone stress. She kept saying, "We just want things to go back to how they were," as if that was a real solution. I told her, "Going back to how things were is exactly the problem. I don't want to keep pretending everything's fine while you and Dad keep acting like Liam is the only one who matters." I reminded her that I'd spent years dealing with this favoritism, and I was finally standing up for myself. And instead of understanding, they were making me out to be the villain. But she kept going on about how family isn't supposed to be fair, and how sometimes we just need to put our differences aside. She even threw in, "We're getting older, Alex. Do you really want things to be like this for the rest of our lives?" It was pure guilt tripping, and I could see exactly what she was doing, but it didn't make it any less effective. As much as I hated to admit it, her words got to me. I don't want things to be like this forever. But I also don't want to keep putting up with their crap just to make things look okay. So I told her, "If you want things to get better, then actually listen to what I'm saying. Acknowledge that you've hurt me and that the way you've treated Liam and me isn't fair. I'm not asking for miracles here, just a little accountability." But she shut that down fast, saying, "Oh, so we're supposed to apologize for helping your brother? That's ridiculous, Alex. You know we love you both equally." It was like talking to a wall. She didn't get it, and maybe she never would. So I said, "If you can't understand why this bothers me, then maybe you don't actually know me as well as you think you do." She didn't take that well. She huffed, said something about me being dramatic, and then hung up. At that point, I was done. I'd given them every opportunity to understand my side, and every time, they'd twisted it back on me. Grace was right. I didn't owe them anything. If they wanted a relationship, they'd have to make an effort, but I wasn't going to chase after people who didn't respect me. It was that simple. Over the next couple of weeks, I just focused on my own life. Grace and I spent more time together, and I started investing energy into things that actually made me happy. We planned a few weekend trips, focused on our goals, and tried to just enjoy life without all the family drama hanging over us. It was honestly refreshing to feel like I could breathe again. But it wasn't completely over. My parents didn't like being ignored, and they were determined to make sure I came to my senses. Out of nowhere, they started calling Grace, sending her messages asking her to talk some sense into Alex. They kept telling her how much it was tearing them up inside that I wasn't speaking to them and how they missed having a close family. Grace, being the amazing person she is, shut that down right away. She told them that if they wanted to talk to me, they needed to approach me directly and actually listen to what I'd been saying, instead of trying to make her the middleman. She wasn't going to let them guilt her into fixing a situation they'd created. I couldn't have been prouder of her. After that, the call stopped. I think they finally realized that I wasn't going to budge and that Grace wasn't going to play their game either. It was quiet for a while, and I actually felt some peace for the first time in months. I knew they weren't happy with me, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was done bending over backward to keep a family bond that only seemed to matter when it was convenient for them. Looking back, it's crazy how long I put up with all of this, just because they're family. I'd been taught my whole life that family was everything, that no matter what, you stick together. But now, I was seeing things differently. Family might be important, sure, but it doesn't mean sacrificing your own happiness to keep the peace. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you just because they're related to you. For the first time, I felt like I was actually standing up for myself, and it felt good. It wasn't easy, and there were definitely moments where I felt guilty, like I was doing something wrong. But Grace kept reminding me that this was about protecting my own well-being, not about making them happy. Now, as I sit here, I'm realizing just how much weight I've been carrying from this family mess. It feels lighter now, like a huge burden has been lifted. I don't know if my parents will ever really get it, but that's not my problem anymore. I've said my piece, and if they choose to ignore it, then that's on them. For now, I'm just focusing on the life I'm building with Grace. I thought things were finally settling down, but it turns out my family had other ideas. After weeks of silence, when I figured they'd finally backed off, I got hit with something I didn't see coming. I got a notice from my bank. My parents had somehow accessed an old joint account we'd used for some family expenses back when I was in college. I'd totally forgotten the account even existed, and apparently, so had the bank. The joint account was linked to my primary account, which meant they had easy access to a chunk of my savings. And of course, they'd helped themselves. I couldn't believe it. After everything I'd said, everything I'd laid out for them, they thought they could just dig into my account like it was their own. It was so unreal it almost felt like a bad joke. I spent a solid 10 minutes just staring at my account, trying to make sense of it. There was no mistake. It was a direct withdrawal. I didn't even know what they'd used the money for, but I had a sick feeling it wasn't anything essential. I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt, but it was hard, knowing their track record. Grace walked in as I was sitting there, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. I explained it to her, and she just shook her head. "You need to take this seriously, Alex," she said. "They're not respecting any boundaries. They're just doing whatever they want because they think they can." She was right, of course. I'd been letting them get away with things for way too long, always brushing it off or trying to keep the peace. But there was no peace here, just more manipulation. They'd clearly crossed a line, and I knew I had to finally put a stop to it. The next day, I called my bank, and they helped me take back control of my accounts, closing the joint one entirely. The woman on the phone was sympathetic, even threw in a little, "I'm so sorry you're dealing with this" at the end of our call, which honestly made me feel seen. Once my finances were secure, I took it a step further. I reached out to a lawyer to see what I could do. I didn't want to involve the law with my own family, but I couldn't ignore this anymore. I needed some way to protect myself. The lawyer, who was about my age and didn't give me any judgy vibes, laid it all out. She told me that technically what they did could be considered theft. I almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. Theft and my parents in the same sentence. But it was the reality. She suggested that I could file a claim to recover the money and even issue a formal warning to prevent them from doing anything like this again. The lawyer's calm professionalism helped ground me. It was all business to her, no drama, and for once, it felt like I had a solid plan. I decided to go through with it. I filed a claim to get my money back, and I had my lawyer draft a letter warning my parents to stay out of my finances. I didn't want this to escalate, but I also couldn't let them keep walking all over me. Grace supported my decision completely, and honestly, that made a huge difference. Having her in my corner kept me from backing down, kept me from letting that lingering guilt push me into just letting it go. About a week later, I got the money back from the bank, but it was far from over. My parents didn't take kindly to getting a legal letter from their ungrateful son, as they put it. My mom called, practically yelling into the phone, accusing me of betraying the family. She kept throwing around phrases like, "We're your parents, we raised you, and this is how you repay us." I stayed calm. I told her, "This isn't about repayment. This is about boundaries. You crossed a line, and I have to protect myself." She wouldn't hear it. She went on and on about how I was tearing the family apart and how all they wanted was to help me and my brother stay close. But I'd had enough. I told her, "If you really cared about our family, you'd listen to what I'm saying instead of trying to make me feel guilty for setting boundaries. You and Dad have never respected my independence, and I'm done letting it slide." I could tell she wasn't expecting me to stand my ground like that. There was this pause, and then she said, "Fine, if that's how you feel, maybe it's better if we don't talk for a while." And just like that, she hung up. I sat there, phone still in my hand, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It's tough to describe. I was sad because deep down, I'd always wanted my parents to understand me, to see me as an adult who deserved their respect. But at the same time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't backing down, wasn't compromising my own happiness for theirs. After that call, I decided to take some time away from them entirely. I didn't block their numbers or anything. I wasn't going for a dramatic cutoff. But I stopped reaching out, stopped answering their guilt-laden messages. For the first time, I felt free to focus on my own life, without their influence hanging over me. In the weeks that followed, I felt more at peace than I had in years. I poured my energy into my work, spent quality time with Grace, and focused on the things that genuinely made me happy. I even took up a few hobbies I'd been meaning to try, like cooking, which I'm admittedly terrible at. But hey, I'm learning. There were moments where I missed them, though. It's not easy to let go of family, no matter how much hurt they've caused. But every time I thought about reaching out, I reminded myself of all the times they'd ignored my feelings, crossed my boundaries, and tried to guilt-trip me into submission. I wasn't going back to that. I'd finally set a line they couldn't cross, and I was sticking to it. Grace has been my rock through all of this. She tells me she's proud of me for standing up for myself, and honestly, that means more than she probably knows. We're even talking about starting a family of our own soon, and it feels good knowing that I can break this cycle. My kids won't have to deal with the same kind of emotional manipulation I went through. As for my parents, I don't know what the future holds. Maybe one day they'll come around, maybe not. But for now, I'm okay with the distance. I'm okay with living my life on my terms, without constantly worrying about their judgment or approval. This whole experience taught me that family isn't just about who you're related to, it's about who genuinely respects you, who's willing to support you even when it's uncomfortable for them. Grace has shown me more love and support than my parents ever have, and that's the kind of family I want to build with her. Looking back, I realize I was holding on to the idea of what I wanted my parents to be, rather than accepting who they actually were. Letting go of that ideal was painful, but it was necessary. And now I feel more confident than ever. I'm finally living my life for me, not for anyone else's expectations. Thanks to everyone who's followed this journey and shared their advice along the way. Your support has meant more than I can put into words. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely hopeful.
I sat across from Mark at our dining table, the evening light filtering through the windows, casting a warm glow over our cozy home. Everything seemed perfect, until he dropped those fateful words that shattered my world. "There's something you need to know, Emily." His voice trembled, and he couldn't meet my gaze. A knot formed in my stomach as I lowered my magazine. "What is it, Mark?" He took a deep breath, his eyes downcast. "We need to get a divorce." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. "What? Why?" Mark's shoulders slumped, and he finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and resolve. "I've been in love with someone else for years. Her name is Heather, and she's pregnant with my child." Time seemed to freeze as his confession sank in. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been lying to me all this time. Tears stung my eyes, and a lump formed in my throat, making it hard to breathe. "How could you do this to me?" I choked out, my voice cracking with emotion. "To our marriage?" Mark's expression softened, but it did little to ease the ache in my chest. "I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant to hurt you, but I can't keep living a lie. I love Heather, and I want to be with her and our child." Anger flared within me, burning away the initial shock and hurt. "So what? Our 5 years together meant nothing to you?" He shook his head, his brow furrowed. "Of course they did, but sometimes love fades and people grow apart." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back?" Mark's gaze dropped once more, and he fidgeted in his chair. "A few years," he mumbled. My heart shattered into a million pieces. The man I thought I knew was nothing but a fraud, a snake who had betrayed my trust in the cruelest way possible. In that moment, something hardened within me. I would not be a victim. I would not let this break me. Mark had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Mark's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded and stood from the table, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our once happy life. As I sat there, tears streaming down my face, I made a vow to myself. Mark would pay for what he had done. I would make sure of it. The next day at work, I felt like a zombie, barely able to focus on the tasks at hand. The weight of Mark's betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders, and I knew I needed to confide in someone I could trust. During our lunch break, I caught up with my friend and colleague, Laura, in the cafeteria. As we settled at a table, she immediately noticed the dark circles under my eyes and my somber demeanor. "Emily, what's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Mark wants a divorce." Laura's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Why?" The words tumbled out like opening a floodgate of pent-up emotion. "He's been cheating on me for years with some woman named Heather, and she's pregnant with his child." Laura's hand flew to her mouth, her expression a mix of shock and anger. "That bastard," she hissed. "I'm so sorry, Emily. You don't deserve this." I nodded, blinking back tears. "I know. And the worst part is, he acted like it was nothing, like our 5 years of marriage meant nothing to him." Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That's because he's a selfish prick who only cares about himself." Her words rang true, and I felt a surge of anger coursing through me. "You're right. He is selfish, and he's going to pay for what he's done." Laura leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, my resolve hardening. "I'm not going to let him get away with this. He thinks he can just toss me aside and start a new life with his mistress? Not a chance." Laura's eyes narrowed. "What are you going to do?" "First, I'm going to hire a private investigator," I said, my voice steady and determined. I need to know exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. If Mark has been cheating for years, there's no telling what else he's been hiding from me. Laura nodded slowly, a sly smile spreading across her lips. Good idea. We need to gather as much dirt on him as possible. Exactly, I said, feeling a sense of purpose settle over me. And then we'll use it to make sure I get everything I deserve in the divorce. Laura's smile turned feral. That's my girl. We'll make sure that bastard pays for what he's done. As we finished our lunch, I felt a newfound resolve coursing through my veins. Mark had made a mistake, thinking he could walk all over me and discard our marriage like it meant nothing. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. Later that day, as I sat at my desk, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Pushing through the discomfort, I made a mental note to schedule a doctor's appointment, just to be on the safe side. Little did I know, the real bombshell was yet to come. A few days later, I found myself sitting in the doctor's office, nervously tapping my foot as I waited for the results. The nausea and fatigue had only gotten worse, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When the doctor finally called me back, her expression was unreadable. Well, Miss Anderson, the tests confirm that you're pregnant. The words hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Pregnant? With Mark's child? The cruel irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Are you sure? I managed to choke out, my mouth suddenly dry. The doctor nodded, a hint of sympathy in her eyes. Yes, I'm afraid there's no doubt about it. Congratulations are in order, I suppose. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Congratulations. My husband just left me for another woman who's also pregnant with his child. This is the last thing I expected. The doctor's expression softened. I understand this must be a difficult situation, but try to focus on the positives. You're bringing a new life into the world, and that's something to be celebrated. I nodded numbly, my mind racing with a million thoughts and emotions. On the one hand, the idea of having a child filled me with joy and hope for the future. But on the other hand, the fact that it was Mark's child, conceived during a time when he was betraying me with another woman, left a bitter taste in my mouth. As I left the doctor's office, I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to embrace this new chapter, to focus on the love and nurturing that comes with motherhood. But another part of me couldn't shake the anger and resentment towards Mark, the man who had so callously thrown our marriage away. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and sank onto the couch, my hand instinctively resting on my still flat stomach. A million questions raced through my mind. How would I tell Mark? Would he even care? Would he try to use this as leverage against me in the divorce? As the hours ticked by, I came to a decision. I would tell Mark about the pregnancy, but not because I expected him to change his mind or come back to me. No, I would tell him because he deserved to know the full extent of the consequences of his actions. The next day, I steeled my nerves and called Mark, asking him to come over so we could talk. When he arrived, he looked uncomfortable, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "What's going on, Emily?" he asked, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze with a steely resolve. "I'm pregnant, Mark, with your child." His eyes widened and his mouth hung open in shock. "What? How?" I couldn't help but scoff at his incredulity. "How do you think, Mark? We were still together when this happened, remember?" He ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of confusion and guilt. "But I thought, with Heather." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it, Mark. I don't need your excuses or your pity. I'm telling you this not because I expect anything from you, but because you need to understand the gravity of what you've done." His shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Well, it did," I said, my voice hard as steel. "And now you're going to have to live with the consequences, just like me." As he left, I felt a strange sense of empowerment wash over me. In that moment, I knew that no matter what happened, I would be okay. I had the strength and determination to get through this, with or without Mark by my side. And if he thought he could just waltz back into my life and play the doting father, he had another thing coming. A few days after breaking the news of my pregnancy to Mark, I found myself pacing the living room floor, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me still clung to the hope that this child might be the wake-up call he needed, that he would come to his senses and realize the mistake he was making. The sound of the doorbell pulled me from my thoughts, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. When I opened the door, Mark stood on the other side, his expression a mix of guilt and determination. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I crossed my arms over my chest, watching him warily. "About what?" He turned to face me, his eyes pleading. "About the baby. About us," I scoffed, shaking my head. "There is no us anymore, Mark. Atath, you made that clear when you decided to throw away our marriage for some fling." His face fell, and he ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Heather is not just some fling, Emily. I love her, and I want to be with her and our child." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt my cheeks flush with anger. "And what about my child, Mark? The one growing inside me right now? Are you just going to abandon us too?" He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Of course not, Emily. I want to be a part of this child's life too." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, how generous of you. You want to be a part-time father to my child while you play house with your mistress and her baby." Mark's expression hardened. "That's not fair, Emily. I never meant for any of this to happen." "Well, it did happen," I shot back, my voice rising. "And now you have to face the consequences of your actions." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Please, Emily, let's not do this. Let's try to work things out for the sake of our child." I shook my head, feeling a surge of resolve coursing through me. "No, Mark, you made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I'm not going to let you waltz back into my life and play the doting father whenever it's convenient for you." His shoulders slumped, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. "Emily, please, get out," I said, my voice low and steady. "Get out of my house, and don't come back unless it's to discuss the divorce proceedings." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but one look at the determination on my face must have convinced him it was futile. With a heavy sigh, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone with the weight of my decision. As the days passed, I found myself hardening my resolve further. Mark had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. I wouldn't allow him to string me along or use the pregnancy as leverage in the divorce. No, I would take control of the situation and ensure that I got everything I deserved, both for myself and for my child. With Laura's help, I started gathering evidence of Mark's infidelity, documenting every lie, every betrayal, and every instance of his deceit. I would make sure that when the divorce proceedings began, I had an ironclad case against him, ensuring that he wouldn't be able to weasel his way out of taking responsibility for his actions. As I sat in my home office, sifting through the mounting evidence, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. Mark had thought he could walk all over me, discard me like a used rag, and move on to greener pastures. But he had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my determination to see justice done. I would make sure that he paid for what he had done in every possible way. And in the end, I would be the one standing tall, with a secure future for myself and my child, while he was left to wallow in the ruins of his own making. With the evidence of Mark's infidelity mounting, I knew it was time to take the next step in my plan for revenge. I called Laura over to my home office, and we pored over the documents and recordings I had gathered, plotting our next move. "This is good, Emily," Laura said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Really good. With all of this, you'll have a solid case in the divorce proceedings." I nodded, a grim smile tugging at my lips. "That's the plan. Mark thinks he can just toss me aside and start a new life with his mistress. He's got another thing coming." Laura leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, though? Divorces can get really messy, especially when there's a kid involved." I met her gaze, my resolve unwavering. "I'm sure. Mark made his choice, and now he has to face the consequences. I'm not going to let him waltz back into my life and play the doting father whenever it's convenient for him." Laura nodded slowly, a sly smile spreading across her face. "All right, then. Let's make sure he pays for what he's done." With Laura's support and the mounting evidence against Mark, I felt a surge of confidence coursing through me. But I knew that in order to truly secure my future and that of my unborn child, I would need more help. The kind of help that only someone with real power and influence could provide. That's when I decided to reach out to my father, Robert, the CEO of a major corporation. I hadn't spoken to him much since the news of my pregnancy and impending divorce, but I knew he would want to be involved, especially when it came to protecting his grandchild's future. When I called him and explained the situation, he was initially hesitant, urging me to take the high road and avoid any messy legal battles. But as I laid out the evidence against Mark and my plan for revenge, I could sense his resolve wavering. "Are you sure about this, Emily?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Once you set this in motion, there's no going back." I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. "I'm sure, Dad. Mark betrayed me in the worst way possible, and he has to face the consequences. I won't let him get away with this, if not when my child's future is at stake." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then finally he spoke. "All right, sweetheart. If this is what you really want, you have my full support. Just say the word, and I'll make sure you have the best lawyers and resources at your disposal." Relief washed over me, knowing that I had my father's backing. With his influence and resources, Mark didn't stand a chance. He had made the mistake of underestimating me, and now he would pay the price for his arrogance. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with my father and the legal team he assembled, building an airtight case against Mark. Every lie, every betrayal, every instance of his deceit was carefully documented and cataloged, creating a mountain of evidence that would be impossible for him to refute. As the legal proceedings began, I could see the panic in Mark's eyes as he realized just how much trouble he was in. His lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement, but I was resolute. I wanted everything, and I wouldn't rest until I got it. Throughout the process, Mark tried to plead with me, to appeal to my sense of compassion and the love we once shared. But every time I looked at him, all I saw was the man who had shattered my trust and thrown away our marriage like it was nothing. And so I pressed on, my determination fueled by the burning desire for justice and the knowledge that I was doing this for the sake of my child, to ensure that they would never have to suffer the same kind of betrayal and heartbreak that I had endured. The day of the divorce proceedings, I strode into the lawyer's office with my head held high, my father and Laura by my side. Mark and his attorney were already there, and the tension in the room was palpable. As we took our seats, Mark leaned over and tried to catch my eye. "Emily, please, can we talk about this? I don't want it to come to this." I met his gaze, my expression cold and detached. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark. You made your choice, and now it's time to face the consequences." He opened his mouth to respond, but his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. The proceedings began, and for the next several hours, we systematically laid out the evidence of Mark's infidelity and betrayal. With each piece of damning evidence presented, I could see the color draining from Mark's face. His lawyer tried to object and deflect, but the mountain of proof was undeniable. Recordings of Mark's secret liaisons, bank statements showing unexplained expenditures, and even private investigator reports detailing his sordid affairs, it was all there laid bare for the world to see. As the hours ticked by, Mark's composure began to crumble. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. At one point, he turned to me, tears in his eyes, and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." But it was too little, too late. I simply stared back at him, my expression unwavering, resolute in my determination to see justice served. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat and delivered the verdict. Mark would be required to pay a substantial settlement, covering child support for our unborn child, as well as alimony and other costs. He would also be forced to sell off several assets, including the house we had once shared, to cover the financial obligations. As the terms were read aloud, I could see the defeat in Mark's eyes. He had gambled everything on his affair with Heather, convinced that he could discard me and start anew without consequence. But he had underestimated my resolve, my strength, and my willingness to fight for what was rightfully mine. After the proceedings concluded, Mark tried to approach me one last time. Emily, please, can we talk? I never wanted to hurt you like this. I turned to face him, my expression steely and unwavering. You had your chance, Mark. You chose to throw away our marriage for a fling, and now you have to live with the consequences. He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't bother. It's over, Mark. You've lost everything. Your job, your money, and most importantly, your family. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone, the weight of his decisions finally catching up to him. In the weeks that followed, I focused on preparing for the arrival of my child, determined to create a secure and loving environment for them. Mark's betrayal still stung, but the satisfaction of seeing him face the consequences of his actions helped to dull the pain. As I settled into my new apartment, a sense of peace washed over me. I had taken control of my life, reclaimed my power, and ensured that my child would never have to suffer the same heartbreak and betrayal that I had endured. And as for Mark, well, let's just say that his troubles were only just beginning. In the months following the divorce, my life took an unexpected turn. Thanks to my father's mentorship and influence, I found myself rising through the ranks of the corporate world at a breakneck pace. It was a sharp contrast to the struggles Mark was facing in the wake of our split. Word of his infidelity had spread like wildfire, and before long he found himself out of a job, his once promising career in shambles. I'll never forget the day I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked like a shell of his former self, disheveled, unshaven, and carrying a burden of defeat on his shoulders. When he saw me, his eyes widened, and he quickly tried to duck down an aisle, but I called out to him, "Mark, is that you?" He froze, his shoulders slumping in resignation as he turned to face me. "Emily," he mumbled, unable to meet my gaze. "I barely recognized you," I said, taking in his appearance. "Life's been tough, I take it?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You could say that. After everything that happened, I lost my job, my house, pretty much everything." A part of me felt a twinge of pity for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. This was the price he had to pay for his betrayal. "And what about Heather?" I asked, unable to resist twisting the knife just a little bit. "I assume she's sticking by your side through all of this?" Mark's expression darkened, and he averted his gaze. "Heather left me," he muttered. "Once she found out I was broke, she took off. Said she didn't sign up for this." I couldn't help but let out a laugh at the irony of it all. "Well, what did you expect, Mark? You threw away a perfectly good marriage for her, and now she's done the same to you." His jaw clenched, and I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You don't have to rub it in, Emily. I know I screwed up, okay? I've paid the price for my mistakes." "Have you, though?" I countered, taking a step closer to him. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still living in denial. You haven't truly faced the consequences of your actions." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me make something clear, Mark. You lost everything because of your own greed and selfishness. You chose to betray me, to throw away our marriage for a fling, and now you're reaping what you've sown." His shoulders slumped, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. He knew I was right. "I hope you learn from this, Mark," I continued. "I hope you understand the pain and heartbreak you've caused, not just to me, but to everyone around you. Because if you don't, you're destined to repeat the same mistakes over and over again." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there alone, a broken man consumed by the weight of his own actions. As I made my way through the rest of the store, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't just the fact that I had won the divorce settlement or that I was thriving in my career. No, what truly mattered was that I had taken control of my life, refused to be a victim, and ensured that Mark faced the consequences of his betrayal. And as I rubbed my growing belly, feeling the gentle flutter of my unborn child, I knew that I had made the right choice. My child would never have to endure the pain and heartbreak that I had experienced. They would grow up knowing that their mother was a strong, resilient woman who fought for justice and refused to let anyone take advantage of her. From that day on, I vowed to be the best mother I could be, pouring all of my love and energy into creating a secure, nurturing environment for my child. And as for Mark, well, he would have to find his own way living with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. The months flew by, and before I knew it, I found myself sitting in the plush leather chair of the CEO's office, the very same chair my father had occupied for decades. As I looked around at the sleek modern decor and breathtaking views of the city's skyline, a sense of pride and accomplishment washed over me. I had come so far, rising through the ranks with a determination and drive that had left my colleagues in awe. And now, here I was, taking over the reins of the company from my father, ready to lead it into a new era of success. As I settled into my new role, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain and heartbreak of Mark's betrayal, the grueling legal battle, and the long road to rebuilding my life, it had all been worth it to get to where I was today. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see my assistant poking her head in. "Miss Anderson, you have a visitor." I frowned, glancing at my schedule. "I don't have any appointments scheduled for this afternoon." The assistant shifted uncomfortably. "It's your ex-husband, Mark. He's insisting on seeing you." A flicker of annoyance flickered within me, but I quickly tamped it down. Of course Mark would show up unannounced, thinking he could just waltz back into my life whenever it suited him. "Send him in," I said, straightening in my chair and adopting a cool, professional demeanor. A few moments later the door opened and Mark stepped into the office. He looked even more disheveled than the last time I'd seen him, his clothes rumpled and his eyes sunken. It was clear that life had not been kind to him since our divorce. "Emily," he said, his voice strained, "thank you for seeing me." I arched an eyebrow, refusing to let him see how his presence affected me. "What do you want, Mark?" He took a deep breath, his gaze darting around the opulent office. I wanted to apologize, for everything." I let out a derisive snort. "A little late for that, don't you think?" His shoulders slumped, and he took a step closer to my desk. "I know I can never make up for what I did to us, but I want you to know that I regret it every single day." "Do you?" I challenged, leaning back in my chair. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're only sorry because you got caught and lost everything." Mark flinched as if I had struck him, but he didn't deny it. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I was selfish and arrogant. I thought I could have it all. The perfect wife, the mistress on the side, the picture-perfect life. But in the end, it all blew up in my face, and I lost everything that truly mattered." I studied him carefully, searching for any hint of deception or manipulation, but all I saw was a broken man, a shadow of his former self, consumed by the weight of his own mistakes. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I understand the gravity of what I've done, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends, even if it's never enough." A heavy silence hung in the air, and for a moment I considered offering him a sliver of forgiveness, a chance to absolve himself of the guilt that so clearly weighed him down. But then I remembered the pain he had caused, the trust he had shattered, and the future he had nearly robbed from me and my child. "You're right, Mark," I said, my voice low and steady. "You can't make amends for what you've done, not to me, and certainly not to our child." His eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "This child will grow up knowing the truth about their father, that he was a selfish, deceitful man who valued his own desires above everything else. They will know that you betrayed us in the worst possible way, and that you were too weak and cowardly to face the consequences." Mark's face crumpled, and I could see the impact of my words hitting him like a physical blow. But I didn't stop there. "You had your chance at happiness, Mark. You had a loving wife and the opportunity to be a father, but you threw it all away for a fleeting moment of pleasure. And now you'll have to live with that regret for the rest of your life." He opened his mouth, perhaps to plead or beg for forgiveness, but I held up my hand once more. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "And don't bother coming back. You lost the right to be a part of our lives a long time ago." With that, I turned away from him, dismissing him from my presence and my life once and for all. As he shuffled out of the office, his shoulders hunched in defeat, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had faced the demons of my past, confronted the man who had nearly destroyed me, and emerged victorious. I had claimed my future with strength and resilience, leaving Mark to face the consequences of his betrayals alone, a cautionary tale of greed and deception. And as I gazed out over the city skyline, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, secure in the knowledge that I was a survivor, a fighter, and a force to be reckoned with.
The call came at 3 a.m., jolting me awake with that sickening certainty that only bad news arrives at this hour. My brother Ethan's voice crackled through the speaker, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Riley, it's Harold. He's gone. My name is Riley, and this is how my quiet life turned into a battlefield I never wanted to fight in." I sat up in bed, my mind racing to process the information. Harold Lawson, my elderly neighbor, Edith's husband of 52 years. And the closest thing I had to a grandfather since moving to the city was dead. Just like that. What happened? I managed to ask, already throwing on clothes with my free hand. Heart attack, they think. Edith found him in his workshop. Ethan paused, and I could hear muffled voices in the background. "Listen, Vanessa and I are heading over there now. You should come too." Of course Vanessa would be there. My sister-in-law never missed an opportunity to insert herself into family matters, especially ones involving property or money. I pushed the thought aside, feeling guilty for thinking ill of her at a time like this. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, hanging up before he could respond. The drive to Edith's house was surreal. Streetlights cast orange shadows across my dashboard as I navigated the empty streets, my mind replaying yesterday's conversation with Harold. He'd been showing me his latest woodworking project, a delicate music box he was making for Edith's birthday. "Life's too short not to make beautiful things," he'd said, his weathered hands carefully sanding the maple lid. When I pulled up to their Victorian home, several cars were already parked outside. Ethan's black SUV sat in the driveway, and I recognized Mark Reynolds' beat-up Honda among them. What was Ethan's best friend doing here already? Inside, I found Edith sitting in her favorite armchair, looking small and lost. Vanessa hovered nearby, one manicured hand on Edith's shoulder in what seemed more like possession than comfort. My brother stood by the fireplace, deep in conversation with Mark. "Oh, Riley, dear." Edith's voice wavered as she reached for me. I crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in mine. They were ice cold. "I'm here," I whispered, ignoring Vanessa's slight step backward, as if making room for me was physically painful for her. "We were just discussing arrangements," Vanessa said, her tone carrying that familiar edge of authority. "The funeral home needs decisions by morning, and there's the matter of the estate to consider." I felt Edith's hands tighten around mine. "The estate?" I asked, not bothering to hide my disbelief. "Harold's been gone for what, 2 hours?" "These things need to be handled promptly," Vanessa replied, shooting me a look that clearly said, "Stay in your lane." "Especially with properties of this value." Ethan cleared his throat. "Maybe we should focus on the immediate needs first," he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. I'd heard that tone before, the sound of my brother choosing the path of least resistance. "I just want to sit with my memories for a while," Edith said quietly, her voice stronger than I expected. "Harold always said there's no rush in doing things right." Something flickered across Vanessa's face, frustration? Concern? Before her practiced smile returned. "Of course, Edith. We're all here to support you. Whatever you need." But as I watched my sister-in-law's perfectly manicured fingers drum against her designer handbag, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Harold's death had created a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum, especially when there's a 3-story Victorian house with original woodwork at stake. Mark caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle head shake. He knew something that made him show up at this ungodly hour. And judging by the way he kept glancing between Vanessa and Edith, whatever he knew wasn't good. I squeezed Edith's hands gently, making a silent promise. Whatever game was starting here tonight, I wouldn't let her face it alone. 3 days after Harold's death, we gathered at Ethan and Vanessa's downtown penthouse for what was supposed to be a family dinner. The city lights twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but the view did nothing to warm the Arctic chill in the room. "I just think it's admirable how you manage on a teacher's salary," Vanessa said, delicately cutting into her salmon. Though I worry about your retirement planning, Riley. Have you considered a career change? I gripped my fork tighter, catching Mark's sympathetic glance from across the table. He'd been invited as a buffer, but even his usually reliable charm couldn't deflect Vanessa's passive-aggressive missiles tonight. I love teaching, I replied, keeping my voice level. And my students love Harold's woodworking lessons. Loved, I corrected myself, the past tense still feeling wrong on my tongue. Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. Oh, you were still doing those? How? Quaint. Speaking of Harold, Ethan and I were discussing Edith's situation earlier. Her situation? I set down my fork, appetite vanishing. Well, that house is far too big for her now, Vanessa continued, shooting a look at my brother. And the maintenance alone. We think it would be best if she considered downsizing. There's a lovely assisted living facility. She's not going to assisted living, I cut in. She's completely independent and that house is her home. Actually, Ethan cleared his throat. Vanessa's been researching some options. They're really more like luxury apartments. With full-time care staff, Vanessa added quickly. Really, it's the responsible choice. We can't have her rattling around that old house alone. What if she fell? Mark leaned forward. Funny you should mention the house. I was looking at the property records for the Historical Society and… More wine. Vanessa interrupted, standing abruptly. She circled the table with the bottle, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors like warning shots. I watched her refill glasses with practiced precision, noting how her hand trembled slightly when she reached Mark. He knew something, and she knew he knew. The funeral's tomorrow, Ethan said, clearly trying to change the subject. Vanessa's been amazing, handling all the arrangements. Without consulting Edith, I pointed out. She wanted a small service at the house, not some production at St. Michael's. St. Michael's is more appropriate, Vanessa snapped, mask slipping for a moment. The whole community wants to pay their respects. We can't have people traipsing through that old house. The liability alone. The liability? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Harold's not even in the ground yet, and you're worried about liability? Riley, Ethan warned, but I was done playing nice. No, let's be honest for once. This isn't about Edith's welfare. This is about the prime real estate her Victorian sits on, isn't it? Right in the path of your firm's development project. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's face went white, then red. Ethan looked between us like he was watching a tennis match and Mark. Mark was suddenly very interested in his wine glass. I don't know what you think you're implying, Vanessa said, her voice deadly quiet, but I'm only trying to help. Unlike some people, I actually understand the financial realities of maintaining a property like that. But then, money management was never your strong suit, was it? Vanessa, Ethan started, but she steamrolled over him. No, it needs to be said. You live in that tiny apartment, playing house with the neighbor lady, pretending you're some small-town hero. Meanwhile, your brother and I are trying to build something real, something lasting. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. You're right, I don't understand. I don't understand how you can look at someone's grief and see a business opportunity. I don't understand how my brother can sit there and let you. That's enough. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal wine glasses jump. Both of you, just. Enough. But as I looked at my brother's face, I saw something I'd never noticed before: fear. Not of the conflict, but of choosing sides. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about Edith's house anymore. This was about every time Ethan had looked the other way, every time he'd chosen peace over principle. You're right, I said quietly, dropping my napkin on the table. It is enough. I left them sitting there, the city lights casting long shadows across their expensive floors, their expensive lives. But as I waited for the elevator, I heard footsteps behind me. Riley, wait, Mark called out. There's something you need to know about Harold's will. Mark's revelation about Harold's will haunted me through the funeral service at St. Michael's. I barely heard the priest's words, too focused on what I'd learned. Harold had left Edith more than just the house. He'd left her controlling interest in several downtown properties. including the block Vanessa's firm wanted to develop. I sat in the back pew, watching Vanessa play the role of grieving family friend perfectly. Her black designer dress and tasteful pearls a stark contrast to Edith's simple navy suit. But now I knew why she'd been hovering so close these past few days. After the service, I followed the sound of voices to the church's small garden. What I overheard made my blood run cold. The medication is making her confused, Vanessa was saying to someone on her phone, partially hidden behind a marble angel. Yes, I understand the timeline is tight, but I can handle Edith. She trusts me now. No, Riley won't be an issue. She's too naive to understand what's really at stake. My hands clenched into fists, crumpling the funeral program I was holding. The rustling paper must have caught Vanessa's attention because she spun around, nearly dropping her phone. "I'll call you back," she said quickly, then painted on a concerned smile. "Riley, dear, shouldn't you be helping Edith with the reception arrangements?" "Cut the act, Vanessa. What medication are you talking about?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Just some mild anti-anxiety pills the doctor prescribed. Edith's been having trouble sleeping since Harold passed. I'm helping her manage the dosage." "Like you're helping her manage her properties?" Something dangerous flashed in Vanessa's eyes. "You know, Riley, this holier-than-thou routine is getting old. Not everything is a conspiracy. Some of us actually understand business and finance. And some of us understand elder abuse when we see it." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Be very careful what you're implying. Ethan and I are trying to build a future here. A real future, not whatever small-town fantasy you're living. Don't make me choose between family loyalty and business necessity." "Is that a threat?" "It's reality. You think you're protecting Edith? You're just prolonging the inevitable. That neighborhood is changing with or without her cooperation. The smart play is to help her transition now, while she can still benefit from the deal." Before I could respond, Mark appeared around the corner. "Everything okay here?" "Perfect," Vanessa said smoothly. "Just discussing the reception details. Speaking of which." She glided away, leaving behind only the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken warnings. Mark waited until she was out of earshot. "You okay?" "She's medicating Edith," I said through gritted teeth. "Probably trying to make her seem incompetent before pushing through the property sale." "That tracks with what I found," Mark nodded. "The development plans were filed months ago. They're already selling pre-construction units in a building that's supposed to go where Edith's house stands." My stomach lurched. "How is that even legal?" "It's not. But proving it." He shrugged. "Corporate law is Vanessa's specialty. She knows how to cover her tracks." I watched through the garden archway as Vanessa rejoined the funeral guests, placing a solicitous hand on Edith's arm. My surrogate grandmother looked smaller somehow, less certain. Was that the medication's effect? "I need proof," I said finally. "Real proof, not just suspicions." Mark hesitated. "I might know someone who could help." "But Riley, are you sure you want to go down this road? This isn't just about Edith's house anymore. If what I suspect is true, we're talking about major real estate fraud. Going up against Vanessa means going up against your brother too." I thought about Ethan, about all the times he'd chosen the path of least resistance. About Harold's workshop, where he'd taught me that doing the right thing wasn't always the easy thing. "Sometimes," I said, watching Vanessa guide Edith toward her car, "family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who you choose to protect." Mark nodded slowly. "Okay then. But whatever we find, there's no going back." "I know," I said, and I did. Because I'd just seen Vanessa slip something into her purse, something that looked suspiciously like a prescription bottle with Edith's name on it. The time for playing nice was over. The morning after the funeral, I found Edith sitting in Harold's workshop, turning one of his unfinished music boxes over in her trembling hands. Something about her posture made me pause in the doorway. She looked defeated, smaller somehow. "I can't seem to find my anxiety medication," she said without looking up. "Vanessa usually brings it, but..." She trailed off, her fingers tracing the half-carved patterns on the wooden lid. "How long has Vanessa been managing your medication?" I kept my voice casual, though my heart was racing. "Oh, she's been so helpful since Harold." Edith's voice cracked. I've been having such trouble sleeping, and she said these pills would help. But sometimes I feel strange, confused. Yesterday, I signed some papers, but I can't quite remember. My stomach dropped. What papers, Edith? Something about the property taxes, I think. Or was it insurance? She pressed her fingers to her temples. Everything's so fuzzy lately. I pulled up a stool beside her, noting how her usually sharp eyes seemed clouded. Would you let me take you to see Dr. Chin? Just for a checkup? Before she could answer, the workshop door creaked. Ethan stood there, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit among Harold's tools and sawdust. Everything okay in here? He glanced between us. Vanessa sent me to check on Edith. She's worried about her missing her medication schedule. I bet she is, I muttered. Edith suddenly gripped my hand. Riley, dear, could you fetch my reading glasses from upstairs? I'd like to show Ethan some of Harold's sketches. Something in her tone made me hesitate, but I nodded and headed for the stairs. At the bottom, I paused, hidden from view. Ethan, Edith's voice was clearer now, stronger. Harold always said you reminded him of himself at your age. So full of potential, but too afraid to stand up to the people you love. Edith, He also said the true measure of a man isn't in what he builds, but in what he protects. A pause. Your wife is drugging me, dear. The silence that followed was deafening. I held my breath, waiting for my brother's response. That's not possible. Vanessa would never. The same way she would never use your friendship with Mark to get information about Harold's properties, Edith's voice was gentle. But the words landed like slaps. The same way she would never forge my signature on development permits? How did you? I may be old, Ethan, but I'm not stupid. Not yet, anyway, though these pills of hers are certainly trying their best. The sound of wood scraping against wood, Edith setting down the music box. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I heard my brother's sharp intake of breath, followed by footsteps pacing the workshop floor. If what you're saying is true, God, this could ruin everything. The firm, our reputation. Your sister's trust, Edith added quietly. Though I suspect you've already lost that. More silence, then the sound of the workshop door opening. I need to think, Ethan said, his voice thick. Just don't tell Riley about this conversation. Please. I slipped into the shadows as my brother hurried past, his face twisted with conflict. When I returned to the workshop, Edith was exactly where I'd left her, but something had changed. She looked more alert, more like her old self. I didn't really need those reading glasses, did I? I asked. Edith smiled sadly. No, dear. But you needed to hear that conversation as much as your brother needed to have it. She picked up the unfinished music box again. Harold always said timing was everything, whether you're crafting wood or crafting justice. I stared at her, understanding dawning. You're not confused at all, are you? Let's just say I've been paying very close attention to what everyone's been doing in my house since Harold died. She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small recorder. And I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly what was in those papers I signed yesterday. The music box sat between us, its unfinished edges catching the morning light, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the roughest beginnings. Mark's law office felt too small for the weight of what we were discussing. Edith sat straight-backed in a leather chair, the recorder placed carefully on the desk between us, while I paced behind her. These signatures, Mark said, spreading out the documents Edith had brought, they're good forgeries. Without the recording, it would be your word against theirs. Play it again, I insisted, even though we'd already listened 3 times. Vanessa's voice filled the room. Just signed here, Edith dear. It's all standard paperwork for the property tax reassessment. Then the sound of shuffling papers. And Edith's deliberately slurred voice asking questions that Vanessa smoothly deflected. Power of attorney, Mark explained, tapping the documents. Plus preliminary sales agreements for all the downtown properties, including the house. They're dated before Harold's death. Edith's hands remained steady in her lap. Harold always said Vanessa reminded him of a chess player, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But why forge documents dated before Harold's death? I stopped pacing. Unless Unless they needed to establish a pattern, Mark finished. Show that Harold had already agreed to sell before he died. Makes everything look more legitimate. A knock at the door made us all jump. Mark's assistant stuck her head in. Mr. Monroe is here. He's quite insistent. My brother burst in before anyone could respond. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loose. Riley, what the hell? Vanessa just got served with a cease and desist order. Good, I said. That means our lawyer did his job. Ethan's eyes landed on the recorder, then the documents. His face went pale. What are you doing? Protecting Edith. Something you should have done weeks ago. You don't understand what's at stake here, he said, running his hands through his hair. The development project, the investors. This isn't just about Vanessa anymore. If this gets out, people could lose everything. People already are losing everything, I shot back. Or don't the elderly count when there's money on the table? That's not fair. No. I grabbed one of the forged documents. Is this fair? Drugging someone to steal their property? Using their grief as a weapon? Riley, Edith's quiet voice cut through my anger. Show him the other envelope. My hands shook as I pulled out Harold's last letter to Edith. I'd found it hidden in the music box that morning, dated just days before his death. I handed it to my brother. Ethan read silently, his face crumpling. He knew, he whispered. Harold knew what we were planning. He knew, Edith confirmed. And he knew what Vanessa was capable of. That's why he changed his will the day before he died. Changed his. Ethan sank into a chair. What did he do? Mark pulled out another document. He left everything to a trust. The only way the properties can be sold is if all 3 trustees agree. He paused. The trustees are Edith, Riley, and you, Ethan. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. I watched my brother's face as the implication sank in. Harold had given him a choice: protect his family's legacy or protect his wife's schemes. Vanessa doesn't know about the trust yet, I said quietly. But she will when we file these recordings with the police. The police? Ethan's head snapped up. Riley, you can't. This would destroy her career. Our marriage. Then stop us, I challenged. Tell me why we shouldn't. Ethan looked at Edith, still sitting calmly in her chair. I'm sorry, he whispered. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to see it. I thought I could protect everyone by staying quiet. Sometimes, Edith said, reaching for his hand, the kindest thing we can do is force the truth into the light. My phone buzzed, a text from Vanessa. We need to talk. Now. Alone. I showed it to Mark, who shook his head. Don't go. Let the lawyers handle this. But as I looked at my brother's broken expression, at Edith's quiet strength, I knew what I had to do. Sometimes you have to face the dragon in its own den. I'll meet her, I said, already heading for the door. But first, I'm making copies of everything. Behind me, I heard Ethan's sharp intake of breath. Riley, wait. There's something else you need to know about Harold's death. The truth about Harold's death hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my car outside Vanessa's office building, Ethan's words echoing in my head. Vanessa was there that night. She went to confront Harold about the properties, and things got heated. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The police had ruled Harold's heart attack natural causes, but knowing Vanessa had been there had stressed him into it. The security guard waved me through to the executive parking level. Vanessa's Tesla sat alone in her reserved spot, gleaming under fluorescent lights. Everything about her life was perfectly polished, carefully controlled. Until now. I found her in her corner office, silhouetted against the city skyline. She didn't turn around when I entered. You know, she said, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass, I actually admired you when we first met. So principled. So sure of yourself. She laughed softly. God, how naive you were. Did you go to Harold's workshop to threaten him? She turned then, her perfect makeup unable to hide the darkness under her eyes. I went to reason with him, to explain what we could accomplish together. But he wouldn't listen. So you killed him. I didn't touch him. The crystal glass shattered against her desk. He had a heart attack. I called for help. I tried. She stopped, composing herself. But you're not here about Harold, are you? You're here about the recordings. And the forged documents. The drugging. All of it. Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You have no idea what it's like, do you? Growing up with nothing, fighting for everything, finally building something real. Then watching it all slip away because some old man decided to play games with his will. Harold was protecting his family. Family? She spat the word. Where was his precious family when he was alive? Where were you when Edith needed help with the house? When the repairs piled up? Ethan and I were there. We earned this. By drugging an elderly woman? By forging documents? By doing what needed to be done. She moved around the desk, each step deliberate. And now you're going to do what needs to be done. What's that supposed to mean? She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. My heart stopped. On the screen was a video of Ethan, clearly drunk, handling documents in Harold's workshop the night of his death. Your brother was there too, Vanessa said softly. He didn't know what would happen, of course. But he helped create those documents you're so righteous about. One call to the police, and he goes down with me. The room seemed to tilt. You'd destroy your own husband? To protect what we've built? In a heartbeat. She set the phone down. But it doesn't have to come to that. The trust needs all 3 trustees to agree to a sale, right? So agree. My voice felt distant, hollow. Or you'll send Ethan to prison. Life is full of impossible choices, Riley. Welcome to the real world. I stared at the broken glass on her desk, thinking of Harold's unfinished music box, of Edith's quiet strength, of my brother's tortured confession. Everything I'd fought for seemed to crumble around me. You have until tomorrow morning, Vanessa said, turning back to her window. Oh, and Riley? Don't bother going to Edith for help. Check your phone. A text from Mark was waiting. Edith's in the hospital. Possible stroke. Get here now. My legs nearly gave out. What did you do? Me? Nothing. Stress affects elderly people in unpredictable ways, especially when they stop taking their medication. Her reflection smiled in the darkened glass. Tick-tock, Riley. What's it going to be? Your principals or your family? I backed toward the door, my mind racing. Everything we'd gathered, the recordings, the documents, Harold's letter, none of it mattered if Ethan went to prison and Edith. I couldn't even finish the thought. One more thing, Vanessa called as I reached the door. Harold's last words? He asked me to tell Ethan he was sorry. Funny, isn't it? In the end, he was apologizing to us. I fled her office, but I couldn't outrun the truth. In trying to protect everyone, I might have destroyed them all. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. There's something in Harold's workshop you need to see. Now. Harold's workshop smelled of sawdust and secrets. Mark stood at the workbench, holding what looked like an old security camera. Harold installed it after the first break-in attempt, he explained, connecting it to his laptop. Hidden in the rafters, motion activated. I found it when I was helping Edith catalog his tools. The footage was grainy but clear enough. I watched as Vanessa entered the workshop that night, followed by Harold. Their argument was muted but intense. Then Ethan stumbled in, clearly drunk, waving papers. But what made my breath catch was what happened next, a 4th person entering the frame. Is that? Edith, Mark confirmed. She saw everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Decision time. Meeting at the house in 20 minutes. Bring the trust paperwork. I looked at Mark. Call the hospital. Get Edith ready to move. The Victorian house loomed dark against the evening sky. Inside, Vanessa paced the living room while Ethan sat slumped in Harold's old armchair, looking defeated. The papers? Vanessa demanded. First, tell me what really happened that night. She laughed sharply. You still don't get it, do you? It doesn't matter what happened. What matters is what happens next. It matters to me. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Tell her, Vanessa. Tell her what you did to my father. The room went still. What did you say? Harold wasn't just my mentor, Ethan continued, finally looking up. He was my biological father. That's why he changed his will at the end. That's why he was trying to protect me from you. Vanessa's perfect composure cracked. You knew? All this time. I found out the night he died. That's why I was there, drunk, angry. But you. He stood up. You knew for months, didn't you? Used it to pressure him into signing those first documents. I did it for us. Vanessa's voice rose hysterically. Everything I did was to secure our future. The properties, the development deals. The medications? I cut in. The forged papers? Harold's death? He was going to ruin everything. She grabbed her phone. One call, and your precious brother goes to prison. Is that what you want? Go ahead, I said quietly. Make the call. She froze, something in my tone making her hesitate. Or we could watch the security footage from the workshop first. All of it, including the part where you switched Harold's heart medication before the argument. The phone slipped from her fingers. That's impossible. I checked. The camera in the rafters? That was just the backup. I nodded toward the doorway. Harold had another one in his old music box. The one sitting on his workbench that night. The one Edith took with her when she left. As if on cue, the front door opened. Edith walked in, steady on her feet, followed by 2 police officers. She held Harold's unfinished music box in her hands. No stroke, I'm afraid, she said to Vanessa. Though I do appreciate your concern for my health. The hospital stay gave us time to get everything in order. Vanessa lunged for the door, but Mark stepped in to block her path. It's over, he said gently. She crumpled to the floor, all her careful control shattering. I just wanted to belong, she sobbed. To prove I was worth something. You all had this perfect family, these deep roots, and I had nothing, Edith finished, approaching her. Just like I did when I first married Harold. He taught me that family isn't about blood or property or proving yourself. It's about the choices we make every day to protect or destroy what matters. I watched as the police led Vanessa away, her mascara tracking black tears down her cheeks. Ethan stood by the window, his shoulders shaking silently. What happens now? He asked nobody in particular. Edith opened the music box, revealing Harold's last project, 3 identical keys nestled in velvet. Now, she said, we honor your father's last wish. Together. She handed us each a key, and in that moment, I understood what Harold had known all along. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, but reconstruction. Building something new from the ashes of what was lost. The music box played its unfinished melody as we stood there, 3 generations bound not by blood or property, but by choice. 1 year later, I stood in Harold's workshop, now transformed into a community woodworking classroom. The autumn light filtered through dusty windows, catching the fresh sawdust in the air as my students worked on their projects. Edith moved between the workbenches, her experienced hands guiding young fingers on tools that had once been Harold's. The Victorian house had found new purpose as a community center, its rooms filled with art classes, after-school programs, and senior activities. Miss Monroe, Tommy, one of my 6th graders, held up a half-finished music box. Is this right? I smiled, recognizing Harold's design. Perfect. He would have loved seeing this. The door creaked open, and Ethan stepped in, looking more at ease in jeans and a work shirt than I'd ever seen him in his suits. He'd left the development firm months ago, starting his own restoration company focused on preserving historic buildings. Ready for visitors? He asked, gesturing outside. I nodded, and he opened the door wider. 2 guards escorted Vanessa in, her prison uniform a stark contrast to her former polished appearance. But her eyes were clearer now, more present. The garden looks beautiful, she said softly, taking in the view through the workshop windows. The community plots were a good idea. It was Edith's suggestion, I replied. Like everything else here. Vanessa watched the children working, her fingers twitching slightly as if remembering her own first attempts at creation rather than destruction. I got your letter, she said. About the rehabilitation program. Teaching business skills to former inmates. We have space, Edith interrupted, approaching us. And experience with new beginnings. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Then Vanessa reached into her pocket and pulled out a familiar object, the key she'd taken the night of her arrest. I think this belongs here, she said, placing it on the workbench. I'm sorry it took so long to return it. Edith picked up the key, studying it in the sunlight. Harold always said timing was everything. In woodworking and in life. Speaking of timing, Ethan cleared his throat. Mark's waiting at the courthouse with the paperwork. If you're all still sure about this. We were. The decision to make Vanessa part of the rehabilitation program hadn't been easy, but as Harold's last letter had reminded us, sometimes the hardest wood makes the strongest bridges. As the guards prepared to leave with Vanessa, she turned back. Why? After everything I did. Because revenge destroys two houses, Edith said simply. Harold taught us that. But redemption can build whole communities. Later, after the students had gone and the workshop grew quiet, I found a small package on Harold's old workbench. Inside was a letter in Edith's handwriting and a single wooden puzzle piece. Dear Riley, it read. Harold left one last project unfinished, a puzzle box he meant for all of us. Each piece holds part of his story, his wisdom. I've given others to Ethan, to Mark, and yes, even to Vanessa. Only together can you understand the full picture. He believed that broken things, when mended with care and purpose, become stronger at the fractures. Your piece reads, the truest revenge is to teach your enemy to build rather than destroy. I held the puzzle piece up to the light, seeing the intricate pattern Harold had carved into it. Somewhere out there, Vanessa held another piece, Ethan another, each of us carrying a fragment of the larger truth. The workshop smelled of fresh sawdust and possibility. Outside, I could hear new voices in the garden, children learning to grow things, seniors sharing stories. A community healing its fractures one small piece at a time. I placed the puzzle piece carefully in the unfinished music box on my desk, the one Harold had started and I was slowly learning to complete. Its melody was still imperfect, but like all works in progress, it carried the promise of something beautiful in its incompletion. Sometimes the best endings aren't endings at all, but doorways to something new. Harold knew that. And now, finally, so did I.
The shrill ring of my phone pierced the quiet of our bedroom, startling me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing as I saw Evan's name on the screen. He never called this late. Evan, what's wrong? I asked, my voice thick with sleep. Silence greeted me, then a muffled sound. Was he crying? Laura, I can't do this anymore, he finally said, his words slurred. I've met someone else. The world tilted beneath me. I gripped the phone tighter, willing myself to have misheard. What are you talking about? Where are you? I'm sorry, Laura. I should have told you sooner. I've been seeing her for months. My stomach lurched. Months? Who is she? It doesn't matter. I'm leaving you. I'll be by tomorrow to get my things. The line went dead. I sat there frozen as the reality of what just happened crashed over me in waves. Hours later, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed when sunlight began to filter through the curtains. The chirping of birds outside felt like a cruel joke. How could the world go on as if nothing had changed? A knock at the door jolted me from my daze. I stumbled downstairs, hoping against hope that it was all a bad dream and Evan would be there, ready to apologize for a drunken mistake. Instead, I found Anna on my doorstep, concern etched across her face. Laura, you look awful. What happened? I crumpled into her arms, finally letting the tears flow. Between sobs, I managed to choke out, Evan, he's leaving me. He's been cheating. Anna guided me to the couch, her arm around my shoulders. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. When did you find out? Last night. He called. He was drunk, said he'd be here today to get his things. Anna's eyes flashed with anger. That coward. He didn't even have the decency to tell you face to face. I shook my head, feeling hollow. I don't understand. We were trying for a baby. Everything seemed fine. Men, Anna spat. They can be real bastards sometimes. You deserve so much better, Laura. A car door slammed outside. My heart leapt to my throat as I saw Evan's SUV in the driveway. I can't face him, I whispered, panic rising. Anna, please. She squeezed my hand. I've got this. You go upstairs. I'll deal with him. I retreated to the bedroom, my sanctuary now tainted by last night's phone call. I could hear muffled voices downstairs, Anna's sharp and angry, Evan's low and defensive. Footsteps on the stairs. My breath caught as the door opened, revealing Evan. He looked terrible, unshaven, bloodshot eyes reeking of alcohol. Laura, he began, his voice rough. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. Anger flared within me, burning away the numbness. Never meant for what to happen, Evan? For me to find out? How long have you been lying to me? He flinched. It's complicated, you wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged, rising to face him. Explain how you could do this to us, to our marriage. Evan's face hardened. There is no us anymore, Laura. I'm in love with someone else. I'm moving out today. The finality in his voice was like a physical blow. I watched in stunned silence as he began throwing clothes into a suitcase. What about our plans? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The family we wanted to build? He paused, not meeting my eyes. Sometimes things don't work out the way we planned. You'll be better off without me. As he zipped up the suitcase, a wave of desperation washed over me. Evan, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. Take some time. He shook his head. It's too late for that. I'm sorry, Laura. I really am. With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the shattered remains of the life we'd built together. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the echoes of broken promises and unanswered questions. Downstairs, I heard the front door close, followed by the roar of Evan's engine fading into the distance. Anna's soft footsteps approached, and I felt her arms wrap around me. It's going to be okay, she murmured. You're strong, Laura. You'll get through this. But as I sat there, my world crumbling around me, I wondered how I could possibly pick up the pieces of my shattered heart. The divorce papers lay on the coffee table, a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. I stared at them, my hand shaking as I reached for the pen. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. We were meant to grow old together, raise children, build a life. Now, all those dreams were crumbling before my eyes. A knock at the door startled me. Anna poked her head in, her eyes full of concern. How are you holding up, sweetie? I tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. I'm fine, just processing. She sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You don't have to be strong all the time, Laura. It's okay to fall apart sometimes. The dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as I leaned into her embrace. I don't understand, Anna. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? No, honey. This is all on Evan. He's the one who broke his vows, not you. As if summoned by his name, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan. We need to talk. Can I come over? I showed Anna the message, my stomach churning. She frowned. You don't owe him anything, Laura, but if you want to hear him out, I'll stay with you. Taking a deep breath, I typed a reply. Fine. Be here in an hour. The next 60 minutes crawled by. I paced the living room, rehearsing what I'd say, trying to steel myself against whatever excuses or manipulations Evan might throw my way. When the doorbell rang, my heart leapt into my throat. Anna squeezed my hand before I went to answer it. Evan stood on the porch, looking more put together than the last time I'd seen him. The familiar scent of his cologne hit me. Bringing a rush of memories, I quickly pushed aside. Laura, he said, his voice soft, thank you for seeing me. I stepped back, letting him in, but maintaining my distance. What do you want, Evan? He glanced at Anna, then back to me. Can we talk privately? Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Anna, I replied, crossing my arms. Evan sighed. Fine. Look, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I made a terrible mistake. I want to come home to work things out. The words I'd longed to hear just days ago now rang hollow. And what about her, the woman you've been seeing? He had the decency to look ashamed. It's over. It was never serious. You're the one I want to be with, Laura. We can start over, maybe even try for that baby we always wanted. I felt the room spin. How dare he dangle our dream in front of me like this? Anna must have sensed my distress because she stepped forward, her voice sharp. That's low, Evan. You can't just waltz back in here and expect everything to be forgiven. Evan's face hardened. This doesn't concern you, Anna. It's between me and my wife. Ex-wife, I corrected, finding my voice. You made your choice, Evan. You don't get to change your mind now that your affair didn't work out. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Laura, I love you. We can get past this. For a moment, I wavered. The thought of reconciliation, of salvaging our marriage was tempting. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the sleepless nights wondering what I'd done wrong. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. We can't. I deserve better than this, Evan. Better than you. His face clouded with anger. You'll regret this, Laura. You're not getting any younger. Who else would want you? Anna stepped between us. That's enough. Get out, Evan, now. As the door slammed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with sobs. Anna held me, murmuring words of comfort. You did the right thing, Laura. I'm so proud of you. Through my tears, I nodded. It hurt, God. Did it hurt? But for the first time since Evan's betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life without him. As night fell, I sat alone by the window, watching the stars emerge. The divorce papers still lay unsigned on the table, but I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow, I'd take the first step towards my new future, whatever that might hold. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime a stark contrast to the dread pooling in my stomach. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Claudia, my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, stood on the porch, her lips pressed into a thin line. Laura, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We need to talk. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. As she brushed past me, the scent of her expensive perfume filled the air, bringing back memories of tense family dinners and veiled criticisms. Claudia settled herself on the couch, eyeing the living room with barely concealed disdain. I hear you're going through with this ridiculous divorce. It's not ridiculous, Claudia, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Evan made his choice. She waved her hand dismissively. Men stray, Laura. It's what they do. A good wife learns to look the other way. I felt my cheeks flush with anger. I deserve better than that. I deserve faithfulness and respect. Claudia's eyes narrowed. What you deserve is irrelevant. What matters is family. And you, my dear, have failed spectacularly at that. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I knew what was coming next, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. How long have you and Evan been trying for a baby? She continued, her voice sharp. 5 years, and not so much as a false positive. It's no wonder he looked elsewhere. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. That's not fair. We both wanted children. It wasn't just my... Oh, please, Claudia interrupted. We both know Evan is perfectly capable. The problem lies with you. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Infertility is complex, Claudia. It's not always about blame. She stood, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Blame? Who's talking about blame? I'm talking about responsibility. Your responsibility to this family, to give Evan the children he deserves. The children he deserves, I repeated, incredulous. What about what I deserve? A faithful husband, a supportive family? Claudia whirled on me, her eyes flashing. You ungrateful little... She caught herself, smoothing her expression into one of concern. Laura, dear, I'm only thinking of your best interests. You're not getting any younger. Who else would want you? The echo of Evan's words from the other day sent a chill down my spine. I don't need anyone to want me, Claudia. I want myself. I choose myself. She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. Don't be naive. You'll die alone, surrounded by cats, while Evan moves on and has the family he's always wanted. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt came pouring out. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Get out of my house right now. Claudia blinked, taken aback by my sudden ferocity. Now, Laura. No, I cut her off. I'm done listening to you. I'm done letting you make me feel small and inadequate. Evan's affair is not my fault. Our fertility struggles are not my fault. The only thing I'm guilty of is staying in this toxic situation for far too long. I strode to the front door, throwing it open. Leave, Claudia, and don't come back. For a moment, she stood there, shock written across her face. Then her features hardened. You'll regret this, Laura. When you're all alone, with nothing and no one, you'll wish you'd listened to me. As she stormed out, I slammed the door behind her, my whole body shaking. I leaned against it, sliding down to the floor as sobs racked my body. Minutes or hours later, I couldn't tell. I heard a key in the lock. Anna's worried face appeared as the door opened. Laura, oh honey? She knelt beside me, pulling me into a hug. What happened? Through hiccuping sobs, I recounted Claudia's visit. Anna's face grew stormy as I spoke. That witch, she muttered. Laura, look at me. She tilted my chin up, her eyes fierce. You are strong, you are worthy, and you are not alone. We're going to get through this together, okay? I nodded, clinging to her words like a lifeline. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the living room, I made a silent vow to myself. No more letting others define my worth. It was time to reclaim my life on my own terms. The law office of Jameson and Associates loomed before me. its glass facade reflecting the morning sun. I took a deep breath, smoothing my blouse and straightening my shoulders. This was it, the first step towards reclaiming my life. Anna squeezed my hand. "You've got this, Laura. I'll be right here when you're done." I nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. As I pushed through the revolving doors, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my destiny. "Laura Thompson?" A smartly dressed woman approached me. "I'm Melissa Jameson. Please, come this way." She led me to a sleek conference room, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Before we begin, I want you to know that everything you say here is confidential. I'm here to protect your interests, Laura." I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Thank you. I'm not sure where to start." Melissa's eyes softened. "Why don't you tell me about your marriage? When did things start to go wrong?" For the next hour, I poured out my heart. The years of trying for a baby, the growing distance between Evan and me, the devastating revelation of his affair. Melissa listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. "Laura," she said finally, her tone serious, "based on what you've told me, I believe we have a strong case for divorce. However, there's something else we need to discuss." My heart raced. "What is it?" She slid a folder across the table. "Our investigators have uncovered some concerning financial activity in your joint accounts." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. Page after page of bank statements, transfers to unknown accounts, large withdrawals. My head spun as I tried to make sense of it all. "What does this mean?" I whispered. Melissa leaned forward. "It appears that Evan has been systematically moving money out of your shared accounts for months, possibly years." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting waves of nausea. How much?" "We're still calculating the total, but it's substantial. Hundreds of thousands, at least." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. "But that's impossible. We don't have that kind of money." Melissa's expression was grim. "I'm afraid you did, Laura. The question now is, where did it go?" As the implications sank in, a cold fury replaced my shock. All those years of scrimping and saving, putting off vacations, delaying home repairs, while Evan was secretly siphoning away our future. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We fight," Melissa said firmly. "We'll file for divorce immediately and petition for a full financial disclosure. If Evan has hidden assets, we'll find them." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "Do it. I want everything he took from me." As I left the office, my mind reeled with everything I'd learned. Anna took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. "What happened in there?" she asked. I pulled back, meeting her concerned gaze. "Evan's been stealing from me, Anna, for years. Everything we worked for, it's gone." Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with anger. "That bastard. Laura, I'm so sorry." I shook my head, a newfound determination coursing through me. "Don't be. This changes everything. I'm not just fighting for my freedom anymore. I'm fighting for justice." As we walked to the car, I felt a shift inside me. The Laura who had walked into that office, scared, uncertain, was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Anna," I said, pausing by the car door, "I need a favor." "Anything," she replied without hesitation. I met her gaze, my voice steady. "I need you to help me pack up the house. I'm not spending another night under the same roof as Evan's lies." Anna's face broke into a fierce grin. "Now that's the Laura I know. Let's go show that cheating thief what you're made of." As we drove away from the law office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in months I felt hope. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. The courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade a silent witness to countless battles fought within its walls. Today it would bear witness to mine. I clutched my folder of documents, each page a testament to Evan's betrayal and deceit. Anna squeezed my arm. "You ready for this?" I nodded, steeling myself. "As ready as I'll ever be." We climbed the steps, the click of my heels echoing in the cavernous entrance hall. Melissa, my lawyer, met us at the courtroom door, her face a mask of professional calm. "Laura, remember what we discussed. Stay composed, no matter what Evan or his lawyer might say." I took a deep breath, nodding. As we entered the courtroom, I saw Evan for the first time in months. He sat beside his lawyer, looking polished and confident. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Anger? Before his face hardened into a neutral mask, the judge entered, and we all rose. As the proceedings began, I felt a surreal detachment, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel on a movie screen. Evan's lawyer painted a picture of a troubled marriage, insinuating that my obsession with having a child had driven Evan away. I gripped the edge of the table, willing myself to stay calm as he twisted our years of struggle into a weapon against me. When it was Melissa's turn, she methodically dismantled their arguments, presenting evidence of Evan's infidelity and financial misconduct. I watched Evan's face as bank statements and text messages were entered into evidence, his cool facade cracking under the weight of his exposed lies. "Your Honor," Melissa said, her voice steady, "my client has suffered not only the emotional trauma of her husband's infidelity, but also significant financial harm. We are requesting full disclosure of all assets and a fair division of marital property." Evan's lawyer jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. My client denies any financial wrongdoing. Mrs. Thompson's claims are baseless and vindictive." The judge peered over his glasses. "Overruled. Mr. Thompson, given the evidence presented, the court orders a full financial audit. You have 30 days to provide a complete accounting of all assets and transactions for the past 5 years." I exhaled slowly, relief washing over me, but my moment of triumph was short-lived. "Your Honor," Evan's lawyer interjected, "in light of these unfounded accusations, my client is amending his petition. We're seeking full ownership of the marital home and a larger share of joint assets to compensate for the damage to Mr. Thompson's reputation." The room spun. Our home, the one we'd lovingly restored together, where I'd imagined raising our children, now another battleground in this war. As the judge called a recess, Evan approached me, his voice low. "Laura, don't do this. We can still work things out. Remember all we've been through together." I met his gaze, searching for any trace of the man I'd once loved. "You're right, Evan. I do remember everything we've been through. That's why I know this is the only way forward." His face darkened. "You'll regret this. When you're alone, with nothing, you'll wish you'd listened to reason." As he walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time, I saw Evan clearly, not as the man I'd loved, but as the manipulator he'd become. Outside the courtroom, Anna and Melissa huddled around me. "Laura, are you okay?" Anna asked, her eyes full of concern. I straightened my shoulders, a new resolve burning within me. "I'm more than okay. I'm ready to fight." Melissa nodded approvingly. "That's what I like to hear. But Laura, you should know, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of our home, filled with memories both bitter and sweet. I thought of the years spent trying to build a family, only to have it all crumble beneath me. And I thought of the future. Uncertain, yes, but full of possibilities I'd never dared to imagine before. "I'm prepared," I said, my voice steady. "Whatever it takes, I'm going to reclaim my life. Evan took enough from me. He doesn't get to take my future, too." As we left the courthouse, the sun breaking through the clouds felt like a sign. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The divorce wasn't an end. It was a beginning. My beginning. 2 years after the divorce, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress. The woman staring back at me was almost unrecognizable, confident, radiant, and genuinely happy. I touched the delicate pendant Randy had given me on our 6-month anniversary, a symbol of our new beginning. "You look beautiful, Mom," came a voice from the doorway. I turned to see Lily, Randy's 12-year-old daughter, smiling at me. My heart swelled with love for this child who had accepted me so readily into her life. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "Are you ready for the party?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Dad's already downstairs, greeting the first guests." As we descended the stairs, the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. Our home, a cozy townhouse we'd bought together, was full of friends and family, gathered to celebrate our first wedding anniversary. Randy's face lit up as he saw us. He crossed the room, planting a kiss on my cheek. "There's my beautiful wife," he murmured. For a moment I was overwhelmed by the sheer joy of it all. After the pain and betrayal of my past, I'd found love again, a love built on trust, respect, and genuine partnership. The evening flowed with warmth and laughter. As I moved among our guests, I caught snippets of conversation, friends remarking on how happy Randy and I looked, how well Lily was doing in school, plans for summer vacations and future get-togethers. It was during a lull in the party that I felt it, a sudden wave of nausea that had me gripping the kitchen counter for support. Anna, ever observant, was at my side in an instant. "Laura, are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. I nodded, taking deep breaths. "I'm fine. Just a little dizzy. It's probably the champagne." But as the night wore on, the feeling persisted. By the time the last guest had left and we'd finished cleaning up, exhaustion hit me like a tidal wave. Randy noticed immediately. "Honey, you look pale. Why don't you go lie down? I'll finish up here." I didn't argue, collapsing onto our bed fully clothed. As I drifted off to sleep, a nagging thought tugged at the edges of my consciousness, but I was too tired to grasp it. The next morning, I woke to find Randy already up, Lily's laughter drifting up from the kitchen. As I sat up, that same wave of nausea hit me. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. With trembling hands, I counted back the days since my last period. How had I not noticed? We'd been so careful, knowing the heartbreak I'd experienced before. I crept to the bathroom, thankful for the pregnancy test I'd kept hidden away, a remnant of my past life with Evan. The 3 minutes it took for the results felt like an eternity. When I finally looked down at the stick, my world tilted on its axis. 2 pink lines stared back at me, unmistakable and life-changing. Pregnant. After years of trying, of heartbreak and loss with Evan, here I was, expecting a child with Randy. Joy and terror warred within me. What if something went wrong? What if I couldn't carry to term? And how would Lily feel about a new sibling? I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this moment. Memories of my past struggles flooded back. The disappointment each month, the failed treatments, the way Evan had eventually blamed me for our inability to conceive. But this was different. I was different. Randy was different. A soft knock on the door startled me. "Laura?" Randy's voice was tinged with worry. "Are you okay in there?" I looked at the test in my hand, then at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me had weathered storms and come out stronger. She had found love again, built a new family, and now stood on the precipice of a dream she'd thought lost forever. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door. Randy's concerned face came into view, and I felt a surge of love so strong it nearly knocked me off my feet. "Randy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I have something to tell you." The doctor's office was eerily quiet as Randy and I sat hand in hand, waiting for the results of my latest ultrasound. At 20 weeks pregnant, every appointment felt like walking a tightrope between hope and fear. "Laura Thompson?" a nurse called, and we both stood, hearts racing. Dr. Patel greeted us with a warm smile, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension. "Laura, Randy, please have a seat." I gripped Randy's hand tighter as Dr. Patel pulled up the ultrasound images on her computer screen. "As you can see," she began, pointing to a grainy black and white image, "the baby's development is progressing well in most areas. However, I'm concerned about the size of the fetus. It's measuring smaller than we'd expect at this stage." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel's expression softened. "It could be nothing to worry about. Some babies are simply smaller. But given your history of fertility issues, I'd like to run some additional tests to rule out any complications." Randy squeezed my hand. "What kind of tests?" "An amniocentesis would give us the most comprehensive information," Dr. Patel explained. "But I want to be clear. There are risks involved." As she detailed the procedure and its potential complications, I felt as if I were underwater, her words muffled and distant. All I could think about was the tiny life growing inside me, the miracle I'd waited so long for, now potentially at risk. "Laura," Randy's voice broke through my haze. "What do you think?" I looked from him to Dr. Patel, then down at my slightly rounded belly. I need to think about it." The drive home was silent, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Lily peering out the window, waving excitedly. The sight of her brought fresh tears to my eyes. Inside, our babysitter quickly picked up on the tension. "Is everything okay?" she asked as she gathered her things. Randy forced a smile. "Just a long day. Thanks for watching, Lily." As soon as the door closed behind her, Lily bounded up to us. "How's the baby?" Did you get new pictures? I felt my throat constrict. The baby's fine, sweetheart. Why don't you go start your homework? We'll talk more at dinner. Once Lily was upstairs, I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of the day finally crashing down on me. Randy sat beside me, pulling me close. "Talk to me, Laura," he murmured. "What are you thinking?" I took a shuddering breath. "I'm terrified, Randy. What if something's wrong? What if I lose this baby too?" He held me tighter. "We don't know that anything's wrong, and whatever happens, we'll face it together." But as the days passed, the fear grew. Every twinge, every moment I didn't feel the baby move sent me into a spiral of panic. I found myself withdrawing, spending hours researching every possible complication, torturing myself with worst-case scenarios. A week after the appointment, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the amniocentesis consent forms. The risks swam before my eyes: miscarriage, infection, preterm labor. How could I make this decision? The sound of the front door opening startled me. Lily burst in, followed by Randy. "Mom, Dad says we can order pizza tonight. Can we get extra cheese?" Lily's excitement was palpable. I tried to smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "Sure, sweetie, whatever you want." Randy's brow furrowed as he took in the scene, the scattered papers, my red-rimmed eyes. "Lily, why don't you go decide on a movie for us to watch later?" Once she was out of earshot, Randy knelt beside me. "Laura, this can't go on. You're making yourself sick with worry." I couldn't meet his eyes. "I can't help it. Every time I close my eyes, I see all the ways this could go wrong. I don't know if I can survive losing another baby." Randy cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to look at him. "Listen to me. You are the strongest person I know. Whatever happens, we will get through it. But you have to let me in. Let me help you carry this burden." As I looked into his eyes, so full of love and concern, something inside me broke. The walls I'd been building crumbled, and I collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "I'm so scared," I whispered. "I know," he murmured, stroking my hair. "I am too, but we're in this together. You, me, Lily, and this baby. We're a family." In that moment, surrounded by Randy's love and the sounds of Lily humming upstairs, I made my decision. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them head on. For my family, all of them. The hospital waiting room buzzed with nervous energy as I sat, one hand on my swollen belly, the other clutching Randy's. At 36 weeks pregnant, we were here for what should have been a routine checkup, but nothing about this pregnancy had been routine. "Laura Thompson?" A nurse called, and we stood following her to the examination room. Dr. Patel entered, her face serious. "Laura, Randy, I'm afraid we've detected some irregularities in the baby's heartbeat. We need to perform an emergency C-section." The world tilted beneath me. "But it's too early," I whispered, panic rising. "We don't have a choice," Dr. Patel said gently. "The baby is in distress." Everything after that was a blur of activity. As they prepped me for surgery, I clung to Randy's hand, terror and hope warring within me. Just before they wheeled me into the operating room, a commotion erupted in the hallway. To my shock, I saw Claudia pushing past nurses. Evan close behind. "Laura," Claudia cried, her face a mask of concern I'd never seen before. "We just heard. You can't do this." Evan stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Laura, please, come home with us. We can take care of you and the baby. This is meant to be our second chance." For a moment, I was transported back to our old life, the years of trying, the heartbreak, the blame. But then I felt Randy's steady presence beside me, heard Lily's voice in my head calling me Mom. I took a deep breath, finding strength I didn't know I possessed. "Claudia, Evan, I appreciate your concern, but this is my family now. My home, my life." Claudia's face hardened. "You ungrateful girl, after everything we've done for you." "That's enough," Randy interrupted, his voice firm. "Laura needs to get to surgery. Please leave." As security escorted them out, I saw a flicker of something, regret, acceptance, cross Evan's face. But I had no time to dwell on it as they wheeled me away. The operating room was a flurry of activity. Through my fear, I focused on Randy's voice, steady and reassuring. "You've got this, Laura. You're the strongest person I know." And then suddenly a cry pierced the air. Strong, defiant, alive. Our baby. "It's a girl," Dr. Patel announced, her voice thick with emotion. "She's small, but she's fighting." Tears streamed down my face as they placed her on my chest, this tiny, perfect being we'd fought so hard for. As I looked into her eyes, I saw not just our future, but my past. every struggle, every heartbreak that had led me to this moment. In the recovery room, surrounded by Randy, Lily, and our new daughter, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. Anna burst in, her face glowing with joy as she took in the scene. "Oh, Laura," she breathed. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" Randy and I exchanged a look. We'd discussed names, but nothing had felt right until this moment. "Hope," I said softly. "Her name is Hope." As if recognizing her name, Hope opened her eyes, her tiny hand wrapping around my finger. In that gesture, I felt the weight of my journey. The pain of betrayal, the struggle to rebuild, the fear and joy of this pregnancy. But I also felt the strength I'd gained, the love I'd found, the family I'd built. A knock at the door drew our attention. To my surprise, I saw Claudia standing there alone this time. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual poise gone. "May I come in?" she asked hesitantly. I looked at Randy, who nodded slightly. "Of course," I said. Claudia approached the bed, her gaze fixed on Hope. "She's perfect," she whispered. Then, to my shock, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Laura, for everything. I was wrong about you, about all of this." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I thought of all the pain, all the cruel words, but as I looked at Hope, at Randy and Lily, I felt the last of my bitterness melt away. "Thank you, Claudia," I said softly. "Would you like to hold your granddaughter?" As Claudia cradled Hope, her face transformed by wonder, I felt the final pieces of my life click into place. This was my family, not defined by blood or past mistakes, but by love, forgiveness, and hope. In that moment, surrounded by the people I loved, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. My journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to a love deeper than I'd ever imagined and a strength I never knew I possessed. As Hope's tiny hand wrapped around my finger once more, I smiled. This was just the beginning of our story.